Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Quick Match gameplay. This time around I'm playing as the Empire against the forces of the Dark Elves on the map Drone. And so this time around I'm actually running my build centered around Balthazar Gelt, but this is not going to be one of those cheese builds where you run around with Gelt, Final Transmutation, and a pair of Witch Hunters. In fact, I'm just using Balthazar Gelt in his normal sort of spellcaster loadout. We're orienting as basically just support light damage spells. As you can see, I did bring metal shifting for the extra damage, evasion of course for the extra mobility. The speed isn't too useful given that Balthazar Gelt is not really there for fighting. And of course Searing Doom, which I think is a great ability. It does good damage and you can overcast it for additional AoE, and it can actually do pretty well. It can definitely shave off quite a bit of HP on most units, plus it's spammable. Plague of Rust to debuff enemy armor, and of course when overcast it can nuke down armor by 60. And then Transmutation of Lead to debuff enemy melee attack and weapon damage, which is really important, I think, against Dark Elves. Obviously, the weapon damage probably won't have a lot of effect against some of their armor-piercing units, but nonetheless, it can be very useful just to keep your troops alive a little longer. If they bring some big nasties like Blackguard or Witch Elves or honestly, even against Corsairs and of course Harkness Executioners, units like that. Then I did bring, of course, Arcane Conduit as well as Staff of Valans, which means that Balthazar Gelt here on Quicksilver is going to have a lot of Winds of Magic, and it's going to be very unlikely that he runs out of magic. Now, on the ground, we do have an Empire Captain as well as a Warrior Priest. The Warrior Priest is stripped down quite a bit. He's got Benediction to boost nearby units' morale. You can see the Swordsman sitting at 81 leadership. He does have Soulfire for that magic resistance and AoE damage, and then Shield of Faith, which is a great little damage reduction ability that lasts for 20 seconds. Alongside him, of course, that Empire Captain, completely stripped down, but just to provide me with a little bit of additional frontline and tankiness. And otherwise, the frontline is pretty cheap and cheerful. A mix of swordsmen, 4 units of them, backed by a single unit of Tattersouls, as well as a unit of the Sigmar Sons. Obviously, these guys are unbreakable and have very high stats. So if you're going against, or relatively high stats, so if you're going up against Bleak Swords like my opponent's got here, or Dread Spears, or even Witch Elves and Blackguard Corsairs, these guys can do okay and kind of damage them pretty effectively. In the back, we do have 2 units of Outriders with grenade launchers. This might seem like a little bit of overkill, but these guys can do a lot of damage to squishy infantry. So Witch Elves, Bleak Swords, Dark Shards, all those units will get shredded by these guys. And honestly, even against heavily armored targets, these guys do have an okay amount of armor piercing and an okay amount of ammo. So you can see they actually got 15 armor piercing damage on explosion. So with 18 rounds of ammo, they can easily tear through even Blackguard or Harkness Executioners and units like that. On the other flank, 2 units of vanilla Outriders, of course, for that precise ranged AP, to strip down dragons, to knock down Cold One Knights, and that sort of stuff. And finally, in the very back, we do have a unit of Royal Griffiths, as well as a Demi-Griff Halberds, just to provide some anti-large. For my opponent, he did decide to go very wide for Dark Elves, which is a pretty common tactic against the Empire. You can see a whole front line of Bleak Swords here, backed by Malekith up in the sky. No heroes. You can see he does have Gaze of Malice, Blade Wind, Chill Wind. Interestingly enough, no Dark Conduit, and no Soul Stealer, which are pretty common abilities. He does, however, have Noxious Breath, of course, from his Dragon Mount, Spiteful Conjuration for the armor debuff, and Stand Your Ground. I personally am not a big fan of bringing Dragon Mounts, I think, especially not against Empire. I think that with the wide selection of Empire nets and just raw armor-piercing DPS, Dragons tend to get stripped down and knocked out pretty quickly. Plus, Empire, of course, does have Silver Bullets, potentially, which can knock down Malekith even faster, despite his built-in 20% physical resist and 25% magic resist, or 25% missile resist. On the flanks, my opponent does have 2 units of Cold One Knights. You can see these guys hidden here a little bit in the trees. And these guys, of course, do provide him with a cheap armor-piercing anti-large unit. The back line here, he does have 3 units of Dark Shards, as well as a single unit of Blackguard and Nagron, just to kind of protect these Bleak Swords, provide them with support. And Bleak Swords can trade pretty effectively with most Empire troops. Here in the trees, he does have 2 units of Shades hidden, and these guys can shred through cheap Empire infantry, as well as tearing through the more heavily armored troops with their heavy armor-piercing values. So right now I'm kind of just squaring off, trying to poke forward with my Outriders. Personally, I'm a big fan of both Outrider variants against Dark Elves because their range is so bad. Dark Shards only have 125 range, the mounted Dark Shards only have 115, and even Shades only have 130. So Outriders can either outrange or match all of those units, and even Outriders with grenade launchers have 100 range, so they can almost match them. And so they're generally pretty safe, especially when they're just pecking away at the front line. You can see over here, these Cold One Knights do take quite a bit of beating. They've already lost a couple hundred HP, and you can see now I do start teeing off on Malekith, who is going to take a hefty beating here, hefty volley, and is going to be forced to back off and leave my handguns alone. In the meantime, the front lines are kind of colliding pretty quickly with this raw amount of with the warrior priest and the empire captain. Going to be very tanky. It's going to be very difficult for my opponent to do good damage. You can see here, despite their shields, that Cold One Knights are taking a bit of a pounding from the Outriders. You can see a good amount of Dark Shard fire going into those Sigmar Suns, whittling them down quite a bit. But they're of course unbreakable and they'll fight very well. You can see I do drop a bombardment here on the Dark Shards, and you can see it does an okay amount of damage. Though certainly not being centered on any of them, not the greatest amount as either. Over here, the swordsmen do plow, and you can see my poor warrior priest here getting hit by Malekith, who's popped stand your ground and all that sort of stuff. But I do, in my turn, cast Soulfire as well as Shield of Faith, just to provide that physical resistance. You can see over here, Balthazar Gelt is going to be providing support up in the area. Over here, the Bleak Swords are collapsing. My opponent's finally pulling his Shades and Knights and Cold One Knights out of on the flank, and you can see those grenade launchers mopping up those Dark Shards with incredible ease. Over here, I have dropped a Plague of Rust as well as a Transmutation of Lead on the front line, which will make these guys much more susceptible, make them much easier to tear apart. You can see, of course, the Outriders are very quick, so they just kite away from the Cold One Knights and leave them to be stuck here fighting a bunch of swordsmen and Empire Captain, which is really not an efficient use of them. Over here in the pits, with of course the help of the Royal of Gryphites, of course, who do cause fear and terror. These guys do actually get terrified and routed off, and you can see the Tattersouls taking advantage of that to exploit that. You can see over here Bombardment go down. You can see just how much damage even the vanilla version of Searing Rain does against the Cold One Knights. It does so much damage there, really beats them down. You can see the Empire Captain here holding his ground against the Blackguard, and things are generally going pretty well. You can see Dark Riders teeing off on, or Outriders teeing off on Malekith. They did take quite a bit of hurt from the Dark Shards, but in turn, the Tattersouls are now on top of them. You can see the grenade launchers just laying the smackdown of these poor guys with their grenades, and are really causing some pretty nasty hurt. Over in the pits, the Royal of Gryphites, despite being peppered down by our arrow fire, are tearing through these Cold One Knights very, very quickly, because Cold One Knights have pretty terrible stats besides their armor piercing and bonus versus large. So they will go down pretty quickly. They'll get slaughtered to a man. And that is really, obviously, this Empire Captain will get terrified by Malekith, but Malekith is just not being used very efficiently here. The Empire Captain is actually a dirt cheap unit at 475 gold, and as soon as I get rid of these Cold One Knights, you can see they're routed, and I don't believe they actually shatter. They're down to 2 models, but they're still just broken. I do charge my Gryphites into these shades, just trying to get on top of them and shut them down. You can see that Searing Rain did huge amounts of work to them, and with the Royal of Gryphites, despite being very low on HP, will tear through these guys very quickly just because their armor values are so terrible, and they don't have armor piercing. Over here, Balthazar Gelt just running for dear life, but my opponent's front line at this point is gently collapsing. You can see I have lost a few swordsmen here and there, but I still have a whole healthy unit of Demigrave Knights who had been waiting for Malekith to drop down, been kept in kind of a strategic reserve, and you can see really things are looking rather grim. These Outriders are definitely very beat up. They're being pursued by those Bleak Swords. My opponent still does have this unit of Blackguard, but at this point it's definitely kind of game. These Cold One Knights are getting caught in the pits here, and that is going to be all she wrote. So Pyrrhic victory for the Empire. Obviously, some of those Empire State troops did get mauled pretty badly. You can see these guys only got 14 kills before getting routed off. This unit only 47, but still, that's actually it's still a respectable amount against the Dark Elves. And their main role was just holding. You can see the Tattersouls and the Sigmar Sons doing great work tearing through those cheap troops. The Gryphites and the Demigryphs doing a pretty good job as well. They definitely zoned away Malekith with their high armor piercing values and hefty damage output. 2 Outriders as well. All these units just laying the smackdown on Malekith, keeping him off my troops. The 2 Outriders with the grenade launchers. Definitely a decent choice. Now, you have to be careful. If my opponent had, for example, brought Dark Riders, which are a pretty common pick against Empire, you have to be very much on your toes with your Royal fights with your Demigrave Knights, ready to defend your Outriders. But otherwise, grenade launcher is going to be very potent against Dark Elves because you can generally outrange them or almost match them for range. Balthazar Gelt did a great job, honestly, with his bombardments, with obviously nothing much in melee, but still, great support spells, great debuffs on the enemy, and just being an all-around champion. Warrior Priest and Empire Captain, similar things, just supporting the troops, and that's really what they're there for, to keep your front line intact, to keep them in the fight, and to keep them performing well. For my opponent's build, the Cold One Knights, despite racking up a decent amount of kills, definitely didn't do the greatest. Most of these kills would have been against Empire State troops, and that's really kind of a waste of a fairly expensive unit. Cold One Knights are, in my opinion, kind of just a one-shot wonder. You point them at an enemy, a large unit, and let them go. Except against Empire with Demigrave Knights, they don't trade that efficiently, and they kind of get melted. They definitely have some better trade-offs with some units. Shades as well, I think my opponent was a little late to pull them out of cover, and that, I think, cost him quite a bit, because by the time they did come out to fight, it was a little late, and he was already getting kind of annihilated. Dark Shards and Bleak Swords, not a terrible front line with backing, the backing of the Blackguard, but nonetheless, it's very, very squishy, and obviously those grenade launchers were able to just work those troops down and crush those Dark Shards. I was able to bombard them with Gelt, bombard them with grenades, and that was really melting them down. And so by the end of the game, my opponent really only had the 2 Shades who were getting torn up by the Demigryphs, and then the Blackguard and Nagaron, so that was definitely a little rough. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, anything like that, be sure to share that down in the comment section below, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.